The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Solutions webinar on Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. My name is Kristen Tovas, and I'm a consultant at Rupprecht Consult. I'll be your moderator for today. And today we'll be hearing from Tim Durant, my colleague here at Rupprecht. He's also a consultant. So just to go through our agenda for today, first I'll be giving you some tips on how to interface with the webinar, and so that you know how to ask questions, to raise your hand, and so we can have some good interaction during this webinar. And then we'll be hearing a presentation from Tim. And then after the presentation, we will have an open questions and discussion session where you can feel free to ask any questions that weren't addressed during the presentation. And I hope that we can have a fruitful discussion there. So just a little overview of some tips on webinar participation. If you want to raise your hand and give a spoken question, then you can press this button right here. It's a little hand with an arrow pointing up. I will see that you're raising your hand, and then at an appropriate moment in the webinar, I will call on you and unmute you. All participants right now are muted automatically, so we won't hear anything that you say until I would call on you. And if you would prefer to ask a written question, then you can see down here in the questions section, you can type your question, and then again at appropriate moments in the webinar, I will ask Tim the questions. We will also be having a series of polls today so that we can get some feedback directly from all of you joining us throughout the world. So when you see this poll come up, please just tick the answer that is most appropriate for you. And then we will immediately see the responses. So if you would like to learn some more about the Solutions project, please do visit our website. It's urban-mobility-solutions.eu. And also, this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is right here. It's Solutions Project EU. So in the coming days, we will upload this recording. And now, without further ado, I will hand over the presentation to Tim Durant, and he will give his presentation on sustainable urban mobility plans. Tim? Tim, sorry, we can't hear you. Perhaps you can unmute yourself. Well, while we're waiting for this to start, perhaps I could actually start the first poll. That might be.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my menu option disappeared there. Sorry, Kristen, for the confusion. But before I started the presentation, I was going to say it would be fantastic to hear who's on the line for this webinar. So I think the first poll questions will be really helpful for that.
Here we go. The first poll question is, where are you from? And we've divided it by continent. So please just tick the one which you are from. We have 61% have voted. Almost everybody. Keep it open for just a few more seconds. And if you haven't voted, please do vote now. Okay, we can close the poll and share the results. And wow, it looks like the vast majority are from Europe today. Perhaps that's because of the time zone difference, followed by North or South America.
Okay, well, we certainly have plenty of examples from Europe, but it's great to hear we have some people from a number of continents on the line as well. So thanks very much for joining.
Good. And then we have two more questions, which we can ask at this point. We would like to know also what your position or background is. So we have a few options here. Are you an urban or transport planner in a public authority, professional in transport-related field in the private sector, a consultant or advisor? Are you from an NGO or are you from a university? Please submit your answers now. Okay, almost everybody has voted. Just a few more to roll in. Okay, I think we can close the poll and share that. Okay, so it's mostly consultants and advisors today, just like us,
Okay.
and also university students or recent grads.
Okay, great to hear. Hopefully we'll have some good questions later on in the discussion rounds as well.
Yeah, I think we will. And then there's just one very quick and easy one. Have you participated in the Solutions e-learning course on sustainable urban mobility planning? So this will give us an idea of what amount of experience you already have, especially in the solutions context with sustainable urban mobility planning as a concept. Okay, almost everyone has voted. Good, then I'll close the poll and share. And wow, most people have not taken the course. So this will be a really good introduction for you today.
Hopefully so, yeah. That sounds good. Okay, that's useful to know. Thanks very much for conducting the polls, Kristen.
Yep, no problem.
And I can see I've now got the screen, so I will carry on with my presentation. Thanks first, Kristen, for the introductions, and I would like to there we go. So great, okay, now the contents page has come up, that's good news. So I've broken my presentation down into three parts, so hopefully we can have some further polls during the course of the webinar and also some pauses for discussion and questions as well. So first of all, I'm going to provide an overview of the SUMP concept introduced by the European Commission and the process. We'll then have a poll question and discussion. Then, as described in the webinar, we are going to have a section about citizens and stakeholders, so a focus on one of the key characteristics of SUMP planning. And then finally, a part 3, which is about the challenge of institutional cooperation, or also integration, as it's called in the guidelines. So first of all, what is a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, or SUMP for short? The European Commission recognized that in its battle against climate change and CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, that the transport sector is a major contributor, and that therefore urban mobility has an important part to play in reducing emissions. And there are a number of other related impacts, as you'll be aware: air pollution, and also the impact that congestion has on economic development in cities, and the wasted time people spend in traffic, these types of arguments. So the European Commission has been promoting the approach of preparing sustainable urban mobility plans, and obviously also implementing those plans. It's important to say that these are not mandatory in each of the European countries. They are promoted by the European Commission, and that the Commission has provided a number of resources to help cities as they begin to look at this planning approach and prepare the plans. So one of the particularly important documents prepared by the Commission was the guidelines, developing and implementing a sustainable urban mobility plan. You can see the picture there. They've also provided a a web platform called Altis, where there's a further range of guidelines and tools available for practitioners to use. And then there is also a series of projects, European projects involving a number of cities and organizations from across the continent to promote the SUMP approach and to provide additional guidance and to actually undertake SUMP planning approaches. So two of the projects listed there are Durant, which has sought to create a network in all the, 25 European countries, so networks of professionals who are dealing with mobility planning issues, and also the Challenge project, which I'll speak about again later, which has been looking at particular issues in the mobility planning approach. So just to move on, so within the urban mobility package, one of the main policy documents prepared by the Commission on this subject, as well as the guidelines, there are a number of key characteristics that are set out for a sustainable urban mobility plan, and these are what set the urban mobility planning approach apart from more traditional transport planning approaches. So the first of these is to prepare a long-term vision involving stakeholders from your city, as well as preparing a clear implementation plan. Clearly there needs to be an emphasis on implementation, because we don't want to prepare documents that sit around on the desk and that don't turn into real change in our cities. There's the assessment of current and future performance, collecting data on mobility patterns in your cities, and then preparing future plans and scenarios of how this could change. There's also the balanced and integrated development of all modes. The Commission doesn't see its role as to dictate what transport solutions are selected in different cities, but they do suggest that a range of solutions should be looked at, with a focus on the sustainable modes of transport clearly, such as public transport, cycling and walking. We've then come on to two characteristics which are particularly we're going to deal with in this presentation today and in this webinar. There's the issue of horizontal and vertical integration. So how do you work with neighbouring planning authorities, government agencies, and how do you work with other organisations working in related policy sectors such as energy and health? And then we're also going to look at the participatory approach to planning, involving citizens in the transport planning approach. The final characteristic listed here is monitoring and how that relates to evaluation. And that's important when we come to look at the planning cycle. Here it comes. This is the planning cycle taken from the SUMP guidelines, and it suggests that the plan would be prepared over a period of 1 to 3 years, and then once the plan is implemented, there will be a cycle of looking at what has worked well in the implementation of the plan, what hasn't worked so well, and again starting the planning cycle. So just to provide an overview of what's covered in this planning cycle, I'll just talk about the 4 quadrants shown there in the different colors. So the first stage contains 3 steps. It's called preparing well, and that's really about setting up your organizational processes so that you have the resources available and the skills available to undertake the full SUMP process in a robust manner. And that includes, at the end of that section, the analyzing the mobility situation and developing scenarios. So understanding the current mobility situation in your city in good detail. There's a number of other important elements that we'll come back to within this section, like the planning for stakeholder and citizen involvement. The second quadrant you can see there is rational and transparent goal setting. So feeding into evaluation at a later stage, it's really important to develop targets for your plan so that you know exactly what you're trying to achieve and that you're able to measure that level of achievement at the end of the process. Step 6 there at the end of the rational and transparent goal setting is about developing an effective package of measures. Measures really relates to the policies that you'll implement and the projects you will implement in cities, and therefore step 6, as shown in the cycle, is a really important stage of the whole process. We then move into the third quadrant, which is about elaborating the plan. This is really about developing your implementation plan and also coming up with a strategy for monitoring and evaluation at a later stage. You can see there at step 9, you actually get to the point of adopting the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. Politicians and citizens adopting the plan and approving the plan. And then moving into the final stage, you are implementing the plan, so delivering projects on the ground and hopefully seeing a move to more sustainable modes of transport in your city during that period. So the next slide, this table really tries to show the main differences between a conventional transport planning approach on the left and the sustainable urban mobility planning approach on the right. So as you can see, I've highlighted some sections in blue, and I'm just going to focus on those. So with conventional transport planning, it refers to a focus on traffic and highways, and the primary objective is traffic flow, capacity and speed. And as you can see, the focus is really quite different for the SUMP approach. So it refers to a focus on people. So this brings in a much bigger debate in terms of the planning process. We're not just talking about shifting cars from one place to another as quickly as possible. We're really talking about the experience for people in terms of improving their accessibility, but also thinking about the effects that transport has on other aspects of our quality of life. So this could be health, using walking and cycling to improve our health, reduced cars and air pollution in cities, and actually reclaiming some space for people in terms of providing nice environments for them to spend their leisure time or to walk and cycle through. The traditional transport planning approach is also a sectoral planning document, very focused. The idea with SUMP is that it refers to related policy areas, like I said, things like health and energy. A traditional transport plan could be specifically related to a single administrative area or a single council area. The SUMP approach really asks local authorities to cooperate with one another so that they look for the whole, they prepare a plan for the whole functioning area of the city. So where are people really traveling to and from to work and also visit the city, and the plan really needs to reflect this much wider area. And then finally, just on this page, there's planning by experts for the traditional transport planning approach, and the SUMP approach talks about involving stakeholders and citizens at all stages of the process. So I thought at this stage I'd show an example of one SUMP which is being prepared, which I think is a good example of a city that's really taken on the SUMP approach fully. So as you can see, there's some images here from Malmö, and I think it's interesting that the city has been in a period of transition from being an industrial city to a knowledge-based economy. And they've really adopted sustainable urban development as a motto, and there's been a lot of emphasis on cycling, using public transport, and the city's actually been successful in reducing car travel by a small amount and increasing cycling and public transport use. As I mentioned, quality of life is a really important aspect of the plan, providing safe and pleasant environments for people to move through. You can see that the cycle lane there is a safe environment for people to use. And then looking at the modal split that Malmö are aiming at, you can see the modal split there in 2013, and in their traffic and mobility plan, they are looking by 2030 to reduce car traffic by 10% with further public transport use, cycling and walking. But having pointed to the Malmo example, there's a whole range of different mobility planning practices across Europe. Typically, the responsibility for setting the framework for planning is at the national level, and therefore we have a whole range of different systems across Europe. The map was produced in 2012 and shows those countries in blue where there was a strong framework for mobility planning or transport planning at that time. The yellow shows those countries that were moving towards a stronger framework, and the purple those countries that were lagging behind. But even during this interim period, since the SUMP approach has been promoted by the European Commission, we've seen this map change. And it's also just important to point out that within the countries there are also examples of very advanced cities which we need to also be aware of. For instance, Malmo, which is in Sweden, as I just mentioned. So I was just going to now move on to some examples of countries which do have strong frameworks for SUMP planning. These include France and the UK, which provided the basis for the preparation of the guidelines. So first of all, we have the PDU plans prepared in France. As you can see, these were actually introduced in 1982, so they've been in preparation now for 30 years or more. And the goal has evolved over time as different issues have become more prominent through those decades. But as you can see, there's reference there to the use of different modes of transport, the protection of the environment, and also improving health in our cities. And what's interesting is that because the PDUs have been in preparation for such a long period, we can start to see the effects over these decades. So the graph shows that actually car traffic or car transport has been on the increase through this period, but finally we're starting to see some reductions, and so that's a very promising sign for us. But just a final point on this, that even though the PDUs have been in preparation for many years, in fact, there are still issues that they need to overcome in the country, and the integration issue, which we mentioned, working with neighbouring authorities and working with different policy sectors, remains a challenge in France. The other type of planning which provided a framework for the guidelines was the local transport plans in England. These were introduced more recently, but still relatively early in 2000. And since that period, then there have been 3 different rounds of LTPs that have been produced. Over time, local authorities have been given more and more flexibility in terms of what they include in their LTP, but there's still an expectation that they will contribute to the national transport goals, and as you can see, there's quite a wide range of goals reflecting the broader SUMP approach. So supporting economic growth, tackling climate change, promoting equality of opportunity for all groups of people, and then also contributing to better safety, security and health, and improving quality of life more generally. So very broad objectives. And I think a final comment on this would be that, like with France, there's the move to a full SUMP approach still poses further areas for development and challenges, and in the case of the LTPs, then the requirement for consultation perhaps isn't as deep in terms of the citizen involvement as the SUMP approach promotes. So we can discuss that later on. As I mentioned, the European Union has been successful in promoting its approach across Europe, and we're now starting to see a new generation of transport plans, or the SUMPs, being produced. There's examples here from Bremen in Germany, Budapest in Hungary, and more, including the new generation of plans in the UK. We are aware that outside of Europe as well, similar approaches are being promoted. So just to focus on one, here in the webinar. We have the comprehensive mobility plans in India. So these were introduced from 2008, and again there's broad objectives, so providing citizens with equitable access to safe, affordable, convenient and sustainable transport. And again there's a focus here on transport orientated development and use of non-motorized modes. So the context in India is clearly for rapidly growing cities, and the use of mobility by private car just isn't seen as a sustainable option. The comprehensive mobility plans are promoted by the government by only allowing those countries, or sorry, those cities that have such plans to be eligible for funding support. So that's a way of motivating cities to produce the plan. And these should be, the comprehensive mobility plans should be integrated into existing city plans, and there's also a requirement for them to be informed by stakeholder consultation processes. So as I said, there's similar approaches being promoted in other continents as well that are of interest for us. I mentioned earlier about the challenge project that we were involved in here at Rupprecht Consult, and this is really trying to provide more detailed guidance on certain aspects of the SUMP planning approach. So as listed here, there's participation of involving stakeholders and citizens in the process, institutional cooperation, this idea of working closely with other planning authorities and other organizations in the area. Measure selection, how do we really go about selecting the right transport modes, packages of policy instruments, and these types of things for our cities. So the project is also looking at that in more detail, as well as the monitoring and evaluation. How do we undertake monitoring in an effective and resource efficient way, and undertake evaluation of plans. So we'll come back to these challenges, but as the next stage we wanted to move to a poll to understand what you see as the biggest challenges to moving to an SUMP approach in the country you're based, or the city you're based as well would also be fine. I think I'll hand back to Kristen to launch the poll. As you can see, I've included here the main challenges from the challenge project: participation, institutional cooperation, measure selection, monitoring and evaluation. But you may have other ideas of what you think are the main changes or the main challenges in moving to the SUMP approach in your country.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, please cast your votes now. Which of these four challenges do you think are the most pressing in your country? And if you think that it's something other, then please feel free to let us know by raising your hand. We can call on you, or you can type it in the questions box as well and let us know what other challenges do you think are important in your country. Okay. We have about 76% voted. If you haven't voted until now, please cast your vote. I will close the poll shortly. Okay, good. So we can share the results, and it looks like institutional cooperation is the winner.
Okay.
The most pressing.
We were also at one of the endurance meetings last week, and institutional cooperation was definitely highlighted by participants at that meeting as being a big issue. But we can see that there's also participation and measure selection also still seen as big challenges. So quite an equal split in terms of that. We also have a couple of others suggested. So it might be a good opportunity to hear from people if they have other ideas about what are the main challenges in their countries. So perhaps if anybody has any questions or would like to highlight what are the main challenges in their countries or cities, this would be a good opportunity.
Yeah, please feel free to raise your hand, or as I said, you can type it in the questions box. It would be interesting to hear what other challenges have you thought of that fall outside of these four main categories. I'll just give you an opportunity for another few seconds. Otherwise, we will move on. Okay, so yeah,
Okay.
maybe you can just think about that a little bit more, and we can also discuss that during the open discussion session at the end of the webinar. So.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly, if there are any questions about the SUMP approach or any comments, it would be really great to hear from different people. Yeah, but we'll be sharing some more examples soon and some more food for thought. So. Okay. Do I have the screen back, Kristen?
Yes, you do. It goes right back to you.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, I can't see my presentation when I... here we go. Hopefully you can all see that again.
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's good to hear. So, great. So we'll move on to the section of the presentation now about participation in SUMP development, and you can see that I've shown a section of the SUMP planning cycle, and section number 2. I'm just going to move that. And activity 2.3 within this early point of the cycle is preparing a plan for stakeholder citizen involvement. So the guidelines really stress that at the beginning of the process, preparing this plan is important so that you know how you involve people throughout the process. And I'm aware that there's a lot of guidelines on this particular section also in the Solutions e-learning course. So hopefully you'll have a chance to look at that if you haven't already. But I was just going to provide some slightly different content so that there's not so much duplication. And first of all, just to highlight the benefits of participation in mobility planning. So first of all, there's the opportunity to include new local knowledge in your planning processes. We all know from working in cities that we can't know everything about every part of the city, so clearly involving people allows us to understand the situation in different districts and different areas much better. We can also listen to the ideas of different people, which produces a new range of options for us to consider in terms of the modes of transport and the projects we could implement in the city. It allows us to test different evidence and positions and to try to understand what are the areas of conflict, so that when preparing the plan we can seek to reduce these as much as possible. It's not always possible to completely remove any objections or conflict, but obviously we can seek to deal with as many of these as possible through the process. And then finally, if we have involved people, then there's a much higher chance that the final plan that's produced will be publicly acceptable. So these are the overall benefits of the participation process. But we also understand that there are a range of challenges in running a good participation process within a city. So the first of these is there can be a lack of political will for carrying out a participation process and listening to citizens and the public. And clearly, if people are asked to comment, but their comments don't influence decisions at the end of the day, then it's been a flawed process, and people will be less keen to be involved in when you try a similar participation process in the future. For the planning authority, there are additional staff time and resources are required, so this needs to be considered at the early stage to make sure that what you're proposing for a participatory approach is in fact achievable and reflects the time you have available. There can be different stakeholder groups who become more or less involved in the process as well. There are often different groups in society. Some are very keen to be involved and are able to have the resources to express their views very, very clearly. There may be other people who are just not even aware of the planning process, or that don't feel so confident to become engaged with the process, and there's a term, hard to reach groups, and it's recommended that when preparing your approach to participation, that you consider how you will engage these hard to reach groups in the participation process. It may be that as a mobility or transport authority that your participation overlaps with similar processes by other parts of the city authority or other organizations, and there's a problem that this can result in consultation fatigue. So people feel that they go to different meetings, but different topics are discussed, and they don't really have the opportunity to join up these different issues, or they may go to a meeting and be annoyed that they haven't been able to speak with someone on a particular issue that's of concern to them. So this also relates to the integration between different departments of the City Council and different organisations to try to join up their participatory processes as much as possible. And if this final point is that if you run a participation approach that hasn't been successful, there's the problem that you would still receive a lot of objections at the end of the process. If people feel that their opinions haven't been taken into account, then this can result in still a lot of late involvement of the public when they hear of a project that they don't approve of, and this is referred to as the dilemma of participation. So we thought now we'd introduce some examples of participation approaches which from Europe, which have been particularly well thought of and successful. And these come from the Shape It project, another project that we've been involved in. So just I've pulled out some of the key recommendations from this project. So political commitment and engagement. Ensuring that there's a senior politician involved in the participation process can be really important, ideally the mayor of the city, and this was the case, for instance, in the Mobility Forum, which was created in Krakow in Poland, and also the Sound Board group meetings in Ghent. So these were examples where the politicians were really involved in leading the process, and this reassured people that there were people that were really listening to their views and that this would be taken into account. We also have here the comment about appropriate integration with decision making. As I mentioned earlier, if people don't feel that their comments will influence the final decisions, they'll be less happy to get involved in the process. And we've included here the example from Bristol, where the public were actually invited to vote on low carbon scenarios. So there was a clear result in terms of public opinion, which could inform the decisions by the City Council. A further recommendation from the project was the city should create a clear participation routine, and what this means is really that rather than having a single workshop, that people hear a lot about the mobility planning process and perhaps get confused and don't know how to participate and get their views across, that there are a regular series of meetings instead. The Dresden debates provides a good example from the city of Dresden in Germany. In this case, the city runs a series of debates. At each of these meetings, a different topic is explored, but people get used to the way the meeting runs and how they can participate in the meetings, and that provides greater confidence in the process. So I think that was a good example to draw to your attention. The final recommendation I wanted to mention was about early engagement with local supporters for your scheme and also potential veto players. By potential veto players, we mean people with a strong role in the decision-making process or very powerful organisations that may object to your scheme. So when you begin the participation process, it's good to work out the key stakeholders and citizen groups that are going to be impacted by the proposals, and make sure that they are involved early and that you hear their main points so that you have more time to resolve conflicts. From the Shape It project, one example that was identified was the Cycling Capital Munich campaign. obviously to try to increase cycling in the city. And as you may know, that BMW are based in Munich, and you might think that they would not be so keen on promoting cycling, but actually they got very involved in the campaign, and you know, adding their powerful local voice to the campaign helped to make it a success in the end. So to present an example from outside of Europe, we're aware that in Brazil that there's a widespread approach called participatory budgeting. This was first introduced in the city of Porto Alegre since 1989. So this approach takes place on an annual basis, where citizens and different organisations are asked to be involved in assemblies where they have the opportunity to discuss the budgets for their districts within the city. There are also a range of thematic assemblies that were organised at the city level to deal with topics such as energy, for instance, health or mobility. So this was a really interesting approach, and if there are any comments, if we have any people that have dialed in from Brazil, it'd be really interesting to hear whether they think this was a successful approach, and how successful in the context of mobility as well. So so that's what I wanted to say about on the topic of participation, and hopefully that's been some useful case studies for you to look at and find out more about. And that's where we were going to move on to the next poll. And what we thought would be interesting here is to try and understand what level of participatory planning you think is currently undertaken in your city on transport and mobility issues. And by levels we mean how deep the engagement is. So the first option would be, are you merely informing people about the decisions that have been made on transport? So are you setting out in publications what's actually going to happen in the city? That would be the most basic level. The next step would be about asking people to provide comments in writing, for instance, on a draft plan. So this might be the next level of consultation. Within your cities and towns, do you hold interactive meetings and workshops so that you're able to discuss with people in a much more open way about what their concerns, problems, and what their ideas are for mobility in the city? And then finally, do you involve citizens in decision making? So to answer this question, we'd like you to just indicate which of these levels you think has been attained by your city. So involving citizens in decision making will be seen as the best level, but you may also have some comments on that, and you'd be welcome to raise your hands. So at that stage I would hand over to Kristen again.
Yes, so it looks like 65% have submitted their answers. So if you have not submitted your answer yet, then please do so. We will be closing the poll in just a few seconds. Okay, so we will close now and share the results. And it looks like the vast majority today have just the first level of participation in their cities, informing people about decisions.
Okay, so that's interesting, and hopefully some of the case studies then will be interesting about some of the approaches in Dresden and Ghent and other cities. So okay, but we can see we've also got some good examples of interactive approaches, much more interactive approaches. And again, if people would have any questions about participation in planning, or would like to share in the webinar what they're doing in their city, that would be really interesting.
Okay.
So we'll give you a couple of minutes to consider whether you would like to speak or ask a question.
It looks like we don't have any quite yet, but you can keep this in the back of your mind, and we would really like to hear from you about this. This is definitely one of the more interesting topics to talk about in relation to SUMP, and definitely a hot topic, participation for all the stakeholders involved. So we can hopefully discuss that then at the end of the webinar.
Okay. Great. So Well, thanks for listening still, and I'll move on then to the final section of my presentation. And this was about the topic of integration and institutional cooperation, as it's also known, particularly in the context of the Challenge project. And the guidelines, the SUMP approach, recognizes that to really undertake very good planning, there's this need for integration, and 3 different types of integration are described. So first of all, we have vertical integration, the need to cooperate and with different layers of government, from the local to the national and the European level, and also organizations working at these different levels. There's also the concept of spatial, territorial integration, and this really relates to the idea that SUMPs should be prepared for the functioning city area rather than just the administrative area of the city council. We've included a map here from a part of the UK, and this is an approach that's used in the UK for actually at government level, for working out the functioning city area of different towns and cities in England and Wales and Scotland, and this is called the travel to work area data set. So this is based on the idea that 75% of the people that live in an area also work in an area, and as you would make out from the map, actually, for instance, there's the city of Bristol indicated here, but the travel to work area of Bristol is shown to me much larger, and in fact there would be a lot of travel between the neighbouring city of Bath and Bristol. But this map provides a good basis for starting to think about what is the functioning city area for these different towns and cities. And one of the trends that has been taken from the preparation of these maps over the years is that there's a trend for longer distance commuting. So clearly these functioning city areas are still increasing. So just to go back, and then the other example of integration, or the other type of integration, is policy integration, and this idea that we should be working with different sectors. So in this case, I've referred to the Covenant of Mayors, which is another European initiative where cities prepare sustainable energy action plans. There's been a lot of discussion about how we integrate SUMPs and sustainable energy action plans, because clearly transport is an important energy use at the local level. So looking at how we can integrate the 2 processes and look at energy on the micro level at use, particularly in the areas of electromobility and smart grids, these types of ideas, then having communication channels between organizations so that they can discuss the opportunities is important. But although the idea of integration is certainly very good, and it could produce some good outcomes for your planning processes, there are challenges to really implementing this approach. So we've mentioned some of these here, but there can be, for instance, political differences between different local authorities. The different organizations can work to different planning timescales, so that when you're producing your mobility plan, you may find that the land use plan has already been completed, so it's not changing at that current stage, or again, the energy plan is undertaken to a different timescale, and these are all factors which can complicate the planning process. Some traditional institutions really aren't set up well to work on these communication issues, and therefore it's important to look at some different ways that we can promote integrated planning. This can include governance and organizational arrangements, and we're going to move on shortly to the example of West Yorkshire. There can also be funding incentives for different authorities to work together as well, and that comes out from the case example I'm going to present regarding Portland in the United States. So As I mentioned, within the UK, West Yorkshire is a good example of where integrated planning for a functioning city area, or in this case actually the functioning area of a number of towns and cities has been undertaken. So just to provide some of the basic information, you can see there that this area, West Yorkshire, includes the cities of Bradford and Leeds, as well as other towns and district areas. The total population of the area is 2.2 million people. It's multi-centred, as I mentioned, a number of cities and towns, and there's actually 5 local authority areas represented here in the map. This diagram has really been included to express just how complex the organisational setup was for this area in the past. So you can see that there's the West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Authority Executive, which is ringed in red, and that was the transport provisional authority. But then we also have the different separate district, city, and borough councils, and we also have the County Council of North Yorkshire, and that's just at one level. And beyond that, there are a number of different connections to different transport service providers, as well as up to the national government level, as well as the regional office. So what has been undertaken in this area is that Metro, which was the local transport authority, which was responsible for the transport strategy, as well as commissioning public transport services, became linked to the district and borough and city councils through the formation of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And this was actually a change which had to be agreed by the national government, so it didn't happen, or sorry to say, it was a complex process to create this combined authority, but it does have a number of benefits. So now within the single authority there is responsibility for transport and economic regeneration, so it makes it easier for the authorities to work together on a number of different policy areas. It also gives them a wider range of powers that come from the different councils that constitute the combined authority. And this slide just refers to the objectives now of the most recent local transport plan prepared by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And as you can see, this covers some of the SUMP type objectives that the authority now has greater capability to deliver on. So that includes economy, the low carbon approach, and also quality of life more generally. And so then to come on to the final example from the United States, and this was an example where there's an economic incentive as well for this approach. So the Federal Aid Highway Act from 1962, so this has been clearly occurring for a long time, that all urban areas greater than 50,000 population, even if these are over administrative boundaries, must form these metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs for short. For the even larger urbanized areas from 200,000 and over, so from medium-sized cities upwards, then they also have to form transport management organizations. In this case, we just wanted to highlight that Portland, located in the west of the United States in Oregon, the MPO called Metro carried out a planning process which both had a large stakeholder-driven element to it, so there was a lot of citizen engagement, and that was around the extension of the existing light rail system. And this involved consultation and institutional cooperation across boundaries, so from the city also to the city of Milwaukee, and Clackamas County. So this was an example. And when I refer to the funding advantage, to receive federal aid, or essentially monies towards public transport projects or transport projects from the national government, then these MPOs need to be in place. So there's an incentive there for these the formation of these organizations and for the local areas to cooperate in this way. So that brings me back to brings me to the end of my presentation. Again, it would be great if there are any questions or any comments that people would like to share regarding planning in their cities. And if not, I'm just going to check the time. We had a number of things, additional things we wanted to draw to your attention. So I do have some commercials, but let me just give it a quick minute just to see if anyone raises their hand.
Yes, we actually have one question here from Andras Kiss, and he asks, are there any measured experiences of the good examples you mentioned? Are there monitoring results from those cities where not only the papers have been prepared already? For example, modal share, air pollution, resident satisfaction, etc. Changes like these. So yeah, just
okay.
how, in general, how the effectiveness of an SUMP can be measured.
Okay. I think I would just make two points in relation to that. I introduced, or I presented about the PDUs in France, and I think because they've been running for such a long period, there was the graph of where there's been monitoring and evaluation by a number of cities over the years, where you saw that car use, for instance, was still increasing for several years still into this monitoring period, but then in the end it was starting to see there was a reduction in car use, which is clearly promising from the perspective of preparing SUMPs. So I would say that's probably one of the best data sets available that's been collected over a long time period. I think because the SUMP approach is relatively new, we're still in the process of collating, monitoring and evaluation in different cities, so more evidence should become available. But there is also the project that is called Evidence. It's an EU project, and they've been collating, as the project name would suggest, they've been collating data that's available from different studies about the benefits of introducing different sustainable modes. So that could be interesting for Andras to look at as well. But hopefully that helps, and thank you for the question.
There is another question from Asma Zbai. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. And they ask, I wonder if there are any attention, work, or documentation about sustainable maritime planning. So this is an aspect that we didn't really touch on in terms of maritime transport. And so I think the question really is, how does that relate in an SUMP? Is it involved? And if so, how? What evidence do we have or documentation?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if the question can be clarified. I think there are some examples from across Europe of where, for instance, ferry services are being reintroduced to help with sustainable mobility. I know, for instance, that a ferry service is proposed in the SUMP in Thessaloniki in Greece, and I think there's examples of, for instance, a ferry service in, I recall it was Stockholm, was being moved to electric. So there are some stories, but I'm not aware of a great deal of projects dealing specifically with this topic, or a lot of different, or a single piece of information.
Okay.
If the question relates more to longer ferry services within Europe across seas between different countries, then I'm afraid I'm not sure what the situation is there, and we would have to go away and check.
Okay. We'll just take one more question since we are already at 4 p.m. For those of you who need to leave right now, I'll just quickly say thank you for joining us, but we hope you will stay and hear the rest of this discussion. So it will just be one more question, and then we'll have a little wrap up. So the last question is from Enrique Pindado, and he asks, basically about the SUMP time horizon. What is the correct time horizon for creating an SUMP and implementing it? So going from through the whole cycle, considering that typically the political period for elected officials is 4 years.
Okay. If I recall correctly from the guidelines, then the official sort of figure stated, which was based on the PDUs and LTPs, was 3 years from start to finish. However, clearly different cities might be in different stages in the process, and cities of different sizes may also be able to produce plans at different timescales. But I think the important thing is that it's not to underestimate. If you want to undertake a good public participation process and work with other organizations, then you need to be realistic in terms of the time planning for how long it will take to prepare a plan. So I would say probably a minimum of 2 years for larger cities. I am aware, though, also that often due to other deadlines occurring, either due to elections or funding proposals, that often cities are pushed to create the plans much more quickly. And I think, therefore, that the cyclical approach is helpful. It's important to allow for public participation in these aspects, but yeah, you have to sort of work to the timescales you have available as well. So this is an important part of the planning.
Okay, well, I think that's a good note for us to conclude our discussion section then. Thank you very much, Tim, for your presentation. And thank you also to everyone who asked questions and contributing to the polls. So I'll just switch it over to my screen here, and yeah, we'll just say thank you again for listening, for taking the time to participate in this webinar for the Solutions Project. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Here's my email and also Tim's email. And also, please note that also the presentation will be uploaded to the Solutions website in the coming days. So that will be available for you and anyone else who's interested in learning more about SUMPs. And also, as stated before, the recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel also in the coming days. So please keep an eye out for that. And also, if you're interested in sustainable public transport, it's definitely a topic that is closely related to the SUMP topic. Then on December 3rd, from 3 to 4 p.m. Central European Time, we will have another webinar with presenter Saul Alviano, and he is from the Transport Systems Department at Embark Mexico. So please visit the Solutions website to register for that webinar, and we look forward to speaking with you again. So at this point, I will just say thank you again, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, also thank you from me as well for the questions as well, and I think Kristen provided our email addresses as well, so if you would like any further information, then please get in contact.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.